The Oracl Network. Look deeper.
Before we get started with today's show, we would like to send out a huge thank you to our newest Patreon, Amanda Hall. Thank you so much for supporting the show, Amanda. If you'd like to hear your name on the next episode of Active Shooter, the podcast, go to patreon.com/active-the-podcast and pledge now.
We have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the warehouse.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 1692 means we got shots fired. 4:15 ASF. Route 91 sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter
mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
A midnight showing of the Batman movie turned into a nightmare. Police are on the scene. Right now we know, as we said, before we were reporting 14 dead, we now believe there are only 12 dead. But I want to look at those hazmat teams going into the movie theater right now. Of course, there's blood on the scene, but also reports of smoke bombs going off. So they're going to go in there and try and figure out exactly what that substance was.
If you've ever gone to a midnight movie premiere, you know the electric feeling that is in the air. The smells of freshly popped popcorn, people dressed up as their favorite characters from the movie, who arrive hours before the movie even begins. On July 20th, 2012, about 400 people gathered into Theater 9 at Century 16 for The Dark Knight Rises, a film which is part of the Batman trilogy. It was a special midnight screening. Unfortunately, 12 people in the theater wouldn't be able to see the entire movie they were so anxiously there for. In fact, they wouldn't even make it home to their families at the end of the night. Active Shooter, the podcast, is a High Five Holly production, and I'm your host, JT. If you've listened to our prior episodes, you know that the Active Shooter podcast team has taken the No Notoriety pledge, and we will not be sharing the real name of the shooters that we cover. We will be giving the shooters a pseudonym and refer to them by that name throughout the episode. This will help in clearing up any confusion in the story, while remaining true to our pledge and not naming the shooter by their actual name. In today's episode, we will refer to the shooter as Sam. Around 11:30 a.m., about a half hour before The Dark Knight Rises premiere was set to begin, Sam entered the theater, showing the theater usher his ticket. He had previously bought his ticket the week prior. He did his research and knew that he needed to be in Theater 9, which is the theater that would have been the biggest crowd that night. In the weeks leading up to the premiere, Sam bought 3 tickets total over the course of several weeks, in hopes of receiving a ticket for Theater 9. However, he was unsuccessful, continuing to receive tickets that were showing the movie in Theater 8. On the night of the shooting, he noticed that there wasn't an usher in front of each theater checking tickets, so he decided to go into Theater 9 anyway. Once inside the theater, Sam, dressed in regular street clothes, took a seat in the front row. He sat down for a short time as other patrons started to pour in, taking their seats. Sam took out his cell phone and pretended to have a call. He stood up and walked outside, using an emergency exit towards the front of the theater. The exit door was supposed to only be used in emergency situations, and it didn't have an alarm on it when the door was opened. Sam already parked his white Hyundai outside of the emergency exit door, so he didn't have far to go. He went out to his car and put on a gas mask, a ballistic 3A jacket, which protects a person from handgun fire, an arm protector, an ammunition belt, which held 256 rounds, a tactical vest, which held 400 rounds of ammunition, and a helmet. Needless to say, Sam was preparing himself for a war. Sam walked back into the theater and threw 2 canisters of tear gas that also contained smoke. They immediately started emitting a painful gas that began to irritate the patient's throats, eyes, and skin. Almost immediately after throwing the canisters into the ground, Sam opened fire. He left during the previews, so by the time he re-entered the theater, the movie had already begun. He started by shooting towards the back of the theater, and then proceeded to walk the aisles while shooting at the moviegoers. At that point in the movie, there were sounds of gunfire and loud explosion noises, thereby making it incredibly difficult for the victims to know exactly what was going on. Most of them thought that this was either a prank, or that the theater incorporated special effects as part of the movie-watching experience. Once people started screaming and falling to the ground, everything changed.
If you're facing the theater, I was sitting in the top left. And basically, we're just in the middle of the movie, and you see it looked like tear gas or pepper spray or something come out. And you see it looks like just flashes of light in the bottom right corner. And you can't really do anything. I sat there just thinking it was just somebody playing around. Next thing I know, I hear people screaming, yelling, "Get down, get down." I told the people I was around, "Get down." And I tried to get out there as soon as possible so I can get everybody out and just try to make sure everybody was okay.
The scene was utter chaos. People were trying to flee the hail of bullets raining down. Others were trying to hide under theater seats in an attempt to hide from the madman. Sam started his shooting rampage with a 12-gauge Remington 870 Express tactical shotgun.
We need rescue inside the auditorium, multiple victims.
Copy.
He switched between this firearm and a Smith & Wesson M&P 15 semi-auto rifle with a 100-round magazine and a .40 caliber Glock 22 Gen 4 handgun. The Smith & Wesson M&P 15 semi-automatic rifle malfunctioned, and he continued using the Glock and Remington shotgun.
And his boot was 2 inches from my head, and I was just face down on the ground, just with my eyes closed, and just praying, man.
In addition to the armor Sam was wearing, he also had earbuds in, listening to techno music. Later, Sam said that he was listening to the loud music to try and drown out the screams and panic coming from his victims. Shortly after Sam started firing, the fire alarm system was triggered in an attempt to let patrons in the other theaters know that there was an emergency and that they needed to evacuate immediately. At one point, a bullet passed through the wall of the theater and hit 3 people in Theater 8, where the same movie was playing. At 12:39 a.m., the first 911 call was made, and an astounding 90 seconds later, the police arrived at the theater. Police officers later said that they drove 100 to 110 miles per hour through Aurora to get to the active shooter call.
When I rolled up, there was people carrying each other out. And dragging people out, wounded people. They were self-evacuating. And immediately I knew it was an active shooter. So I went to the place where, Theater 9, where it was happening. And I had my gun out, and I was standing outside the door. And just then the door burst open, and there was 3 kids carrying, 2 carrying one that was shot in the leg out. And then that's when I can hear the gunfire still inside. And they were telling me, he's inside shooting, he's inside shooting.
It wasn't until an officer noticed a man behind the theater, who appeared to be another officer based on how he was dressed, standing next to a white Hyundai. As the officer took a closer look, he could see that the man wasn't police at all. On the contrary, this was definitely a person of interest.
I can't say there was any real strategic plan to go to that side of the building for me. I went to the back of the building because when I was approaching the theater, I was coming on I was coming down Sable Boulevard, and that's the side that is next to Sable. When I first saw him, I thought he was a cop until I got a little closer to him, and I was... It's one of those things you can't really process quickly, even while on one level I realized that this is a suspect. Because at the time we were still thinking that there were multiple shooters. Even at the time where you're thinking this is someone who's involved, there's another part of your brain that's just totally unable to recognize that.
As the officer parked his vehicle and walked over to the man, he ordered him to freeze and place his hands on top of the car. He further instructed the man to remain still as he was searched, placed in handcuffs, and detained.
I would say he surrendered. Yeah, I would say he surrendered. He gave up.
When the officer took off the man's helmet, he was shocked to see a man in his early 20s with hair the color of cherry Kool-Aid. The hair was quite obviously dyed, appearing to be blotchy and uneven in color. It was Sam. The officer immediately put him in the backseat of his patrol car, and at 12:45 a.m., he alerted the other officers that he had a person of interest detained. The approximate 1,400 people who were inside the theater were now outside on the sidewalks and lawns, running in a panic, looking for their loved ones, and trying to escape the nightmare they had just experienced. Due to the large amount of traffic from people trying to leave, and the people who were running around the theater, it was very difficult for the ambulances to get close enough to the theater to help the injured. Radio traffic was coming over the police radios from officers pleading for help, as there were people dying inside, and they needed ambulances. Now. There was no time to waste.
I've got a child victim. I need rescue at the back door of Theater 9 now.
Back door of Theater 9 will start him. Again, PD is requesting medical personnel in Theater 9. They have a child down and cannot evacuate.
Finally, when it seemed that the ambulances weren't going to be coming more quickly, the officers asked their superiors for permission to start transporting the wounded in the back seats of their patrol vehicles. In an attempt to spare as many lives as they could, the superiors agreed, and officers started loading the wounded victims into their vehicles, and with lights and sirens blaring, headed towards the area hospitals.
Metro 10, Lincoln 25, do I have permission to start taking some of these victims via car? I got a whole bunch of people shot out here, no rescue. Yes, load them up, get them in cars, get them out of here.
The police quickly sprang into action and developed a plan. They set up multiple triage locations around the theater. A lot of victims didn't know if they themselves were injured, or if the blood on their person was from other victims. People were in absolute shock, and over 100 people were triaged by the fire department. All the movie patrons were separated into groups by which theater they were in, and buses were used to transport them to Gateway High School, where a family unification center was established. Over 200 witnesses were then interviewed and reunited with their families. Between 12:39 a.m. and 1:55 a.m., 20 victims were transported to hospitals by ambulance, and an astounding 27 were transported by patrol cars.
I'm really impressed with the people who made the decision to evacuate to the hospital in patrol cars, and I'm really impressed with the people who did that and made multiple trips back and forth. I've spoken with ER doctors who told me that saved lives.
10 people died inside the theater, and 2 died in the hospital for a total of 12 lives taken that day. 70 people were injured in the attack, and 58 of those injured were from gunfire, while the others were injured when fleeing the theater. Of the 12 killed, 4 men died protecting their girlfriends, while 1 died protecting a close friend of his who had gone to see the movie with him. Alexander Bowick, or AJ to his friends and family, was 18 years old and was a recent graduate from Gateway High School. He enjoyed playing baseball and wanted to study to become an art teacher. Jonathan Blanc was 26 years old and the father of 2 children. He was a Navy veteran and served 3 tours in the Persian Gulf and North Arabian Sea. His girlfriend was injured in the attack and he died, saving her life. Jesse